All right, welcome back. We've been joined now by an expert on the matter, program specialist at CISLAC, Samuel Asimi. He sheds more light on what the corruption perception index actually means. Welcome to the program. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Can we get a breakdown? For those as simply as you can put it, for what those who don't know what it means, what is the corruption perception index?
Okay, so the Corruption Perception Index, which we call the CPI, released by Transparency International Nigeria, is actually a data that seeks to actually rank countries and score them according to the perceived levels of corruption in their administrative and public sector. Coming down to the 2022 Corruption Perceptions Index, which was released yesterday, we had 180 countries which Transparency International rated on this index, and we rated them from a score of 0 to 100. So 0 is actually very corrupt and 100 is actually very clean. Coming down to Nigeria, Nigeria had a score of 24 over 100 on the 2022 Corruption Perception Index. So this is the same score Nigeria had in 2021, which is still 24. On the ranking, Nigeria had a rank of 150 over 180 as against 154 over 180. That shows a slight improvement on the ranking, but however, the main focus is on the score, which is still the same, and that actually shows there are issues with corruption. And just also add that for the last 11 years, because the methodology was changed in 2012, the new methodology for measuring the Corruption Perceptions Index by Transparency International. Within this window of 11 years, 24 has been the lowest score Nigeria has ever actually gotten, and that was gotten in 2021 and also 2022. So it's actually important to have a context for that. We had high points in 2016 when Nigeria scored a score of 28. And we've had, from then we had 27, 27, 26, 25, 24.
So the highest has been
24.
28?
Yes, the highest has been 28, which was in 2016. Aside that, we've then had steady declines down to 24, which was also retained.
Oh, that's interesting. So I think people might be wondering, what goes into really getting these figures. Where does it come from? And also, if you can give an instance, like as to how it is gathered, do people just look at news on the, look at headlines and say, okay, the accountant general so amount, and then they add it all. How does it really work?
Yes, thanks for that. And I think it's very important to highlight that the CPI is a composite data. So the CPI makes use of data from different sources, and for Nigeria, the CPI makes use of data from 8 sources. So you have the Bertelsmann Transformation Index, you have the World Bank Country Policy Assessment, you have the World Justice and Rule of Law Project, you have the Economics Intelligence Unit, and a whole lot of other sources. So 8 of these sources are where the CPI is computed for Nigeria. So each of them have their score of the country according to the perceived levels of corruption in the public and administrative sector. So Transparency International actually gets data from these sources. So it's important to actually highlight that. So it's not as if Transparency International conducted like a survey. We actually make use of data from these credible sources, which the government engages with oftentimes. For example, you have the World Bank. The government gets lots of credit from the World Bank, and definitely also when the World Bank has its data, the data is actually credible because so we make use of data from credible institutions like the World Bank. So once we get the data from all these institutions, then the CPI is actually computed. So this is how it's done.
Yeah, but I think the question is, people might wonder, what are you take for instance, just use the World Bank as an example. Like what could you be getting from them? Are they saying that in their dealings with Nigeria, they've witnessed some, we'd like to know what could they be saying that contributes to that 24, that low figure?
Yes, I think it's thanks for raising that. So the World Bank actually looks at these sources. They actually look at country experts and business executives. They actually interview them on issues relating to bribery, issues relating to nepotism, issues relating to excessive bottlenecks. Maybe you're trying to get papers, or you're trying to register something, or they're trying to file taxes. All those bottlenecks. They also measure issues around nepotism. issues around how the country's criminal justice system is able to actually prosecute and address issues of corruption. So these are like the key issues they actually look at within these sources that we actually work with. So they work with country experts and business executives, and from there we actually get the sources from them at Transparency International.
Oh, that's fair enough. So I think now the question is, you know, what's really going on within the country in terms of the fact that the current administration, you know, campaigned heavily and came with that mindset of there were three key areas: anti-corruption, economy, and security. And so, you know, the president is touted to be someone who's really, you know, anti-corruption. So I wonder what is happening. And also, if you recall, at the report there, when you released the CPI, some persons, part of your group, also lead out some of the positives. So what's really happening? Is it that they're not enough to counteract the negatives? And how does it still manage to thrive within this administration? What do you think?
Yes, so I think in the last 7 years, you could say 7 years plus of the administration, indeed the administration came under the mantra of tackling corruption, addressing the challenges faced by the nation, especially around corruption, like you rightly mentioned. But then what we realize is the efforts, it's not commensurate with what we are seeing on ground with the results. It's definitely not commensurate. So like we highlighted in the press release yesterday, the report, there are key issues. We of course looked at a balanced approach to it. First, in terms of the areas of improvement, like you rightly saw. So yes, we saw some legal frameworks like the Electoral Act, the Anti-Money Laundering Prohibition Act, like the Proceeds of Crime Management Act. These were legislations passed last year. But then there are the bigger issues that were resolved. So last year you had the president granting pardons to convicted politically exposed persons. So these are persons that have actually been convicted by the court of law. Some of them, their conviction actually took lots of years, close to 10 years in different cases. And now you would imagine, so here you go, the president who actually says he's going to combat corruption, granting pardon to politically exposed persons, whom these anti-graft agencies spent good time, money, and in one of the cases, one of the agents, one of the officials of the anti-graft agency actually came under physical attack while trying to prosecute that matter. So now you find, after wasting all those resources, after going through all those processes, then the president comes to grant a pardon. Now that in itself actually portends, it sends a wrong signal to different people. So one, it's actually not fair, in the sense that there are other poor people who have committed similar crimes or even lesser crimes who weren't granted pardons. So if the doctrine of fairness is actually not in order there. Secondly, you are engaging international actors. You want to recover your assets from foreign jurisdictions. You want the international community to take you serious. You want the international community to believe you're combating corruption. But that actually sends a wrong signal. Aside that, high-profile corruption cases we had in the country. So you see the issue about the Accountant General of the Federation and the EFCC. You see lots of revelations we had there. They recovered about 30 billion naira from him, according to the EFCC's chairman, and that's actually lots of money going there. Then you come down to the issue of subsidy, the opaqueness of the subsidy regime. So last year, the National Assembly actually approved 4 trillion naira as payments for subsidy, and that's about 25% of last year's budget. Now, you and I experienced that largely in 2022, a good amount of 2022, Nigerians spent it in the fuel queues. Currently, we still experience that. So the fuel queues have not disappeared. You have the National Assembly approving 25% of your country's budget on subsidy. So what's really going on? We were here in the country when we had the issue of toxic fuel. They imported toxic fuel into the country, and that's no better definition of economic or financial crime than that. but yet we didn't have people brought to book. You move on to security. We had real brazen attacks around across the country. No one has actually been brought to book. So when you look at all these issues lined up, you'd really then see the main challenge that yes, the administration says it's going to fight corruption. Yes, the administration came under the mantra of fighting corruption, but the evidence on ground doesn't really prove that. And if you look at all those and down to the judiciary, you go to the National Assembly, you see issues around the constituency project. ICPC is recovering lots of money, getting about 7 billion naira recovery, telling contractors to return and execute projects worth close to 10 billion naira. So these are actually lots of funds stashed out there, and this whole reasons and this whole challenge is being faced by the country definitely doesn't augur well, and there's no way you'd score high on the corruption perceptions index if you have all these issues bedeviling the country.
All right, so what are the recommendations? You know, I know you're solution driven, so what would you recommend?
Oh, yes, so we outlined about 10 recommendations in the report we actually had. So issues around ensuring that the anti-graft agencies investigate high profile cases was there. Issues around investigating or improving transparency around the subsidy regime was there. Issues around preventing the oil theft, we had lots of them. Nigeria couldn't meet its OPEC quota because of oil theft. And you know, it baffles lots of us because it's not something you just say you take your car and just steal it. You need vessels that would actually come into the country. So there's no way you'd say it's been done by petty thieves. This is proper organized crime. And if we can't actually solve that, then we have a problem because we have lots of agencies. So one of the solutions was to ensure that the government actually tackles this head on. We also recommended that when it comes to granting pardons, the president should actually consult very well with the media, with the citizens, with the academia, not just grant pardons that way, even with the anti-graft agencies, because lots of the anti-graft agencies agents who were interviewed off the record really felt like they were demoralized because they spent years working on that. So issues like that should actually be dealt with. We have also cases of politically exposed persons that have been exposed in different leaks over time. The government should investigate these cases so that we know where these things are. Yes, the anti-graft agencies are making efforts in convictions. Yes, they are. But some citizens will tell you the people who they are convicting are not the high-profile guys. So you have the high-profile criminals getting pardons. Then you have the anti-graft agencies convicting the low level criminal. So these are the issues that we really think they should be solved. So around the issue of constituency project, we need some level of transparency there. It shouldn't be opaque. We should know what's happening, and the judiciary itself should actually dispense justice very well, especially as we're entering an election year. And like you mentioned in your introduction of your program, there are lots of litigations, lots of court issues going on, and the judiciary needs to actually ensure that it's not being used by different actors to derail the democracy. And most importantly, the elections should be free and fair. So the presidency, INEC, security agents, anti-graft agencies, political parties, they all have a role to play. They should ensure all hands are on deck, that the elections in the next coming months should actually be free and fair.
All right, thank you very much. Just one final question. What do you expect would be the response from the government? Do you think you might have some sort of sit down where these recommendations can really be brought, or, you know, might we stay as usual?
Yeah, so there are two types of reactions we get from the government, oftentimes when we have this release. So the first is usually you could have a backlash from them. They condemn the reports and they say all whatnot. And on that, it's very interesting because since Transparency International has been releasing the report, when it's good, you get the opposition, backlash from the opposition. When it's bad, you get the backlash from the government. So either way, you definitely have a backlash. That's one. Then secondly, it's a more constructive approach that we've actually had over time, where you have some government institutions reaching out to us and trying to go down into the methodology and discussing how best the country can improve across each of these areas. We've had that over time in the past with different high-level officials, and we're also open to having that. We are all Nigerians, we are citizens. We want what's best for the country. So we'll definitely not shy away from any opportunity that presents itself for us to actually constructively engage with the government to see how this is improved in the best interest of the nation.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Samuel Asimi, for coming and breaking down the index. Hopefully your recommendations reach the right ears and they are implemented. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, that's what we'll take on the first segment of the program, and that is a discussion on the Corruption Perception Index. We'll be moving on to the issue of the ruling party now and some alleged rift between the presidential candidate and other members of the party. But that'll be after the break. Let's take some updates. When we return, the program continues. Stay with us.